Welcome to Out of the Woods, the threat hunting podcast.
First, I want to welcome everyone to our Out of the Woods Threat Hunting live Discord interactive podcast that aims to cover the burning topics related to all the threat hunting and security stuff you all want to know about. But just as a reminder, this podcast is live and we'll be taking comments and questions from our Discord server. So if you want to participate, make sure to sign up using the link in the welcome message. And we'll do a quick introductions around the horn. I'm Scott Poley. I'm a senior threat hunter at Cyborg Security. I do all sorts of security stuff and have a background in security. Check out my LinkedIn or connect with me there. That's great. Mike, I think you're next on the roster.
Hey, it's Mike here, engineer, work with these guys to help vet out the capabilities and deal with some other fun pre-sale, post-sale stuff.
All right, Mr. Lee.
Hey, Lee Argonal here. I'm sure I've blasted news somewhere and you've got the pleasure of seeing my face somewhere on LinkedIn or Twitter. I apologize for that. Customer success, content development, and threat hunter trainer. Like Poley said, follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever the case.
We got a guest today, Mr. Tom Kostura. You want to give a brief introduction? We'll go in depth a lot later, but let them know who you are.
Yeah, sure. Tom Kostura. I'm currently a SOC manager for a relatively large utility company in the Midwest. Kind of been in the security realm now for 8-10 years, analyst, engineer, and now in a lead role for the last couple of years. So excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
Sweet. So just so everyone knows, every episode we feature a cocktail recipe made by our team / ChatGPT. Give it a try. Leave your feedback in the channel. It's the Cryptic Cloak. I think you should already see it in the Discord channel. That's what I'm partaking in today. It's kind of tasty. I would say an after dinner drink. But usually we start this off with, we dive into 4 interesting artifacts that each of us kind of bring to the table before we jump into some security discussion topics. So now, let's just jump right into that and get this episode started with the interesting artifacts. So what you guys see currently is Mike's. So Mike, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an article from Seeking Alpha. They're typically centered around, stock market trends, investment, VC, venture capitalists. So it was interesting. They're starting to talk about really at a high level cybersecurity companies and just growing demand through our current kind of financial, we'll call it a ripsaw, right? So this is really, I brought this to the table today because it affects 2 sides. It affects the product vendors, but it also affects those individuals in these corporations, in these organizations that are trying to mature their internal security operations centers and their capabilities. And so, we always hear, we've seen over the past couple of months, we see all these riffs from companies like Splunk, Salesforce, Elastic, you name it, right? And we see a lot of these firings, and it kind of, the news would seem that everything's kind of doom and gloom. And this article really was interesting, saying that there was still demand through Q1. We didn't really see that dip in sales from a product vendor perspective, but it also seems that the budgets are still aligned with cybersecurity. So just a little bit of history. So, back in 2008, there was another financial, pretty bad financial crisis, right? Our CEO at Cyborg was running an MSP during that time, and cybersecurity, it stayed its course, right? It didn't seem like the budgets were necessarily dramatically impacted, right? You still need security, you still need to secure your business and the capabilities that make revenue. And so coming into Cyborg, as we were building Cyborg and as we founded this company, COVID happened, right? And so you got to imagine, as we kick this thing off and, incorporate and start to build a product, everything shuts down. And so it was really a lot of that experience from Dave saying, look, this will be okay from a cybersecurity perspective, right? We're proving a value. There is value there. It's not, just some tool we're creating or some product we're trying to get out there, right? So we had that product market fit. We're able to stand the test of time through COVID, and then now we're also getting to this next kind of ripsaw effect. And so, at least when we see these articles and we start to understand that these companies are doing RIFs and laying off people, cybersecurity is going to be there, right? Budgets might tighten up a little bit, you know, contract constriction, right? You might lower the amount of seats you might buy from a tool. You might lower some of the tiers that you might go up on, but you still need cyber. So I guess I want to kind of pass it around in y'all's experience. Have you dealt with budget constraints from the higher level organization down to the security side, or do you feel like you've been able to kind of operate through these kind of financial dips and valleys?
I feel like Tom is the perfect person to talk to this.
Hey, new guy, Tom coming in. Let's go.
Hey, all right, let's hit the ground running, I guess. Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, and I think it varies. Now, my experience is limited to where I manage, where I've been. This is my first bout in leadership with my first major corporate company in this realm, in this light. But you know, your ears to the ground, you see other people going through it, and you have a lot of, you know, kind of that networking community where you start talking about some of these problems. A lot of it comes down to, you know, you got to roll with these punches. It's just the nature of the game, right? And it doesn't necessarily, and I think this is one of the points, this is really the point I want to make. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lose while you're making these, you know, these adjustments. You can rely on, you know, your talent in-house to really kind of think innovatively. You can troubleshoot solutions with existing things that you don't necessarily have to worry about being cut. You know, I'm being very generic, but I've seen it time and time again over the years that's really a way to go. I mean, if you just try to think through that problem innovatively and look at what tools you do have in the toolbox. So how can I use my hammer a little differently than I used it last week? You'd be surprised at the things that you actually solve thinking that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, with the economy being bad, you know, it also means that the bad guys that rely on making money as part of their game, they're going to need money just as much as anybody else. So it's not like they're going to stop. They might even be slightly more aggressive for more of the financial gain type of attacks. So like cyber becomes kind of front and center in some avenues. And, you know, with the world climate, with everything going on in the world, I feel like even with the economy going poorly, but we have like conflicts and wars going on, that kind of brings cyber more forefront to the table. So I feel like it might cause more conversations you have to be able to have with people questioning, like, why do we have this? What are we using this for? And as long as you can speak intelligently and kind of back up, especially if you got data to back up why we have these tools, why we do these things, I feel like it should be a fairly easy conversation. Now, when push comes to shove, when they're just not the dollar value, I also think it's really important to understand the value of what tools and things you do have. So if you need to make those cuts, you know what won't be as impactful. But yeah, I feel like cyber it's one of those things. The beauty of cyber is I feel like it's never going away. But the problem is I feel like cyber also is still let's solve it with a niche group of people and niche tools, when it's really should become everybody's problem and everybody's responsibility, right? So,
Lee, you got any struggles with that in your past?
So I've never dealt with budgeting. Never been when I was in leadership position, never had to deal with budgets. I think I am going to start paying attention to Dave more, though, that if he stands up a company or starts a process, that there might be something on the horizon that correlates. I mean, we have the house market, we had, you know, COVID now, like kind of worried now.
Yeah.
But JDub actually threw in the Discord chat that said MSSPs will probably get more get more economies of scale. So I'm thinking along the lines of Pulley. Cybersecurity is always going to be there, right? We always need to protect against something. I do believe we are in a better position than we have been before, that getting the buy-in is easier because the CISOs and the CIOs and the CTOs, they have a seat at the table that's been established now for a couple of years. Now it's like really driving home why. Before it was just like, oh, that, you know, we don't need that. The question though is, yes, MSSPs will, if they start getting more business, because say, you know, some companies do have to lay off cybersecurity or SOCs or analysts or anything like that. If you're in a recession, how are you going to scale if you're getting more business, but you still have to stretch that dollar even further? And I don't have the answer, God no, but it's just
the MSP situation is interesting, right? We've seen it where, call it 5 years ago, there was a sprint to outsource your security, right?
Mhm.
It moved from on-prem to the cloud. It moved from in-house security to MSPs, large and small organizations, right? But those MSPs don't have the people to manage the hundreds and 200s of clients that they have anyway, right? So all you're doing is basically just moving the ball around, and you still have the same problems wherever that ball goes, right? It'd be interesting though, with the amount of resources there are for open source tools, getting the buy-in to be able to deploy that, right? So let's say
use
our
your
budget
talent
gets cut.
differently. I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Our budget gets cut, like we can't go buy the best of breed network tool, right? But we have servers that we can deploy Zeek on, right? And get the visibility and kind of leverage it internally. I just
Done that
think
a
that
lot.
we're about to go to RSA next week, right? And I think they do a really good job of yelling and screaming that you need the tools to be secure. And a lot of these open source products are just as good, right? So it's interesting to get that buy-in from managers and CISOs to say, okay, we don't have the budget, but there are these capabilities out there that we can go deploy.
Yeah, when I was in university space, I solved a lot of problems with open source, right? Because there's no budget for glamorous tools that people buy in big corporations. And open source community, I mean, the tools are fantastic. Sometimes they even feel like they have some more capability than some of the other stuff, but you need the people to manage it. That's where you can't lose people and go open source at the same time. Like, but at least with people, you get other returns than just a tool that runs that may or may not do what you need it to do, right? So, good point.
But to both all of your points, maybe the idea for open source starts becoming more of a conversation because it opens up that idea that, hey, we need to cut costs. So our tolerance to not have a vendor that has, a warranty or a premium support, and more, we're going to put it in the hands of our folks to run it. Maybe that conversation starts sparking, which would be a good thing, quite honestly.
Empower the people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
could you imagine? Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, to play devil's advocate, say you go open source. Say you're the dude that's driving forward and he's like, I got this all
Someone
set
leaves.
up, I got this. He's like, oh, by the way, I got a new job and no one knows how to do it. I mean,
That's the
at least
risk, right?
with vendor support, you could be like, hey, we need training, we got that, can we talk?
Yeah,
if that
and
guy was running the whole thing.
I think we're going to talk about that later in the podcast, but documentation is key at that point, and separation of duties, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that happen where you have a firewall guy that built all the policies and he leaves and you're like, what is this? What are these rules? What are these things we need to do, right? So it happens all the time.
Yeah, I see a bunch of people posting really great tools and open source things already just in our Discord chat. Yeah, please, if you guys know of good things that share the community or with us, I like digging into things as well. Please post those. Those are really cool.
Also, J-Dubs did follow up. He said, first of all, MSSPs cost less than a full-time FTE or a full-time employee, which I didn't have experience, didn't even think about, because you're not just paying for one of us, you're paying for our insurance. And then they said they also scale well because they share detections across clients, which makes sense. The reuse of tools, reuse of resources that you can. That's very insightful. Thank you very much, J-Dub.
Cool. So you guys ready to move on to the next massive topic I've thrown on the plate?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
All right.
Open source, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, now that we're talking open source, let's talk open source. All right, so one of the things I really want to hit on is we have hit and made reference numerous times on our weekly, on this, live session, but we talk Sysmon a lot. And I've even had some questions as far as from folks that I've interacted with, like, where to start with Sysmon, what's a good starting config, what do you do with it, all that kind of stuff. So I basically put together a swath of all my favorite resources Sysmon related, and we'll throw all those in the chat here in a second, but I'm going to kind of step through them. First, I wanted to say the Swift-on security. This was like the de facto, right, when it first came out, of a great, just, good configuration to see most things without having too much noise type of configuration. Now to take note here, it is like 2 years old, so it hasn't really been maintained, I would say, as of current, but it's been forked a lot. So if you chase some forks, you might find some interesting forks out there, which makes me pivot to my next resource, and that is Florian Ross Fork. If you don't know Florian Roth, he's a great guy to follow, connect with. Just very smart person, an individual when it comes to threats, emerging threats, malware, and things like that. He kind of has his own Sysmon configuration based off of the Swift stuff, but he's been maintaining it better and pulling from other repos and kind of trying to, and it's only a couple months out of date when you think about that. So just another good, like more mature, I would say, resource, but I wanted to call out both because they both get used. One's more, I say, vanilla than the other. And then the other resource I really like and I want to touch on is Olaf Hartong. I guess you'd say I'm really bad at pronouncing people's handles, so just bear with me. He has a really interesting approach to Sysmon, and it's a modular approach. So he walks through the different types of file types, and I'm sharing this on the screen for those that are actually, seeing the video, but he will make a specific rule almost in Sysmon for a specific activity. Like if I click into the process one, just for those that are looking, you can see he has all these rules for excluding things he knows are noise to put in there, and then what possible includes to put in for things that are interesting. But what's nice is you can see the structure of what that looks like. If you want to make a really complex way to have emerging detection capabilities to say, hey, this just came out, we don't have visibility, how can we build that quickly? It's great examples for that. The next thing I wanted to touch on was there's this malwarearchaeology.com. It's like cheat sheets for logging. It's like how to turn on and enable logging on all different things in Windows. Some of it has to do with some tools, but he has a Sysmon specific cheat sheet, and I'll pivot to that next. And what's nice about his cheat sheets, or their cheat sheets, is they talk about basic configuration to consider outside of just the Sysmon config. Like one thing he takes note is, hey, if you're running an AV or EDR solution, make sure to whitelist the driver and the binary Sysmon's running. Otherwise, you see more impact on the system. Just good tips for, hey, how do I run this the best possible way? The other thing I like they call out are different uses for the config, where they had like, hey, if you have a malware lab, you should have different config in your like workstations versus your incident response config versus your production systems or high risk systems, kind of like profiling what configs you might run where. I like that approach as well. So I just want to kind of call that out. I thought that was really cool. Next, this is a topic I've hit on before. Black Hills Security, they have a whole event logging section that talks about how they collect logs, but in their DEF CON 3, which is where I'm at now, it actually has their Sysmon config that they've kind of been maintaining. And what's really nice about their Sysmon config, as I just touched in there, they do a really good job mapping the MITRE technique stuff to their configuration. So as things fire and logs from Sysmon, you'll see MITRE handles, which kind of help drive what do you want to do with that, or what are you possibly seeing. Really cool. And it's been maintained since February, so it's not too old, which was really cool as well. And what's nice about them, if you look at their stuff for their event logging, is they have a lot of PowerShell scripts meant to help maintain a lot of the Sysmon stuff. So they built some built-in management of that. There is the YouTube video, which will share the link to what that all is. I don't want to play it right now, but something to check out. Other resource, a few more to dig through. Ion Storm, he has a Sysmon config as well, but really what I really like about him is he tried to create an install bat and update bat for Sysmon, so some management of Sysmon. But what's really cool is at the very bottom, he has the how to hide Sysmon from services. So, if you're running Sysmon in your environment, and attackers may look for that, and if they can find it, they may look for where a config may be running from, so they might be able to bypass kind of what are the things you're looking for. He has a really cool configuration where you can run this and actually hide Sysmon from the system, so it's not enumerated as easily. Kind of a cool thing I pulled out from that. I want to touch on the Sysmon for Linux real quick from SysInternals. We use it in our lab for the few things that I've done for Linux. It is fantastic as far as the data, because I expect the data to be formatted and similar to what I see on Windows, and it is. Granted, a lot of the event types for the Windows Sysmon, very Windows driven, but good data, because if you know anyone that works on Linux, they're usually working from the command line, and having process command line type stuff in a Linux environment is very telling on what's going on. So you can really kind of understand what looks good and bad very quickly. Another touch point is it's Nasalabi. Let's go with that name. Sysmon Tools. I know I told you handles, right? I'm kind of disappointed because it seems very outdated, at least 4 to 2 years old. Sysmon View is like 2 years old. But what he was trying to do is create a visualization where you can pull out the Sysmon logs and visualize the data, and then also a GUI to help build configs. I only bring it up because if there's a fork of this or it works with the current version, sometimes when tuning your Sysmon configs, it's visualizing things super beneficial, right? You can say, hey, what I'm seeing is a lot of noise, or what I'm seeing I don't want to see. It lets you know if your stuff's working. And then Scarred Monk. Ironically, I was reading something from the Brute Ratel guy, and he said he worked with Scarred Monk about when he was building out his C2 framework. So obviously, both very talented individuals. But he built Sysmon Simulator. And why I bring this tool up is this is a tool where you can actually generate the logs that you want to see that will populate in Sysmon. So if there's something you're looking for and you want to see if your configuration will detect it, you can kind of have that pre-built, what techniques or data do you expect to see, and then you can test it against your config. So it's a good way to kind of validate that your config's working the way you want it to, especially if you don't have like the full blown red team pen test type emulations, right? So a really cool way to generate data, or if you're doing training exercises, right, and you want to be able to generate data for people to respond to, great tool for that as well. And then last, this was brought, or not, second to last, I should say, the T-Cell EDR telemetry. This was kind of brought to our attention today. I'll pull up the actual Google sheet, but really cool for people that want to augment their data collection. This is really highlighting what tools have visibility based on the type of telemetry. And it has Sysmon listed in some other tools. So if you need to augment your environment based on EDRs and what EDR sees and versus what you can augment with Sysmon to kind of overlay the two so you're not doubling down, I thought it was a really cool layout where he kind of they walk through where they see visibility, where they don't, and all that kind of stuff. So something cool to really check out. And last but not least, obviously, you should always check out the Sysinternals Microsoft Sysmon page, because one, it tells you it's where you get Sysmon from. It tells you all the stuff about the event IDs. But the big thing for me is this condition table. It just really helps you understand what can I do in the config to help tune my config to make sure I identify what I want and exclude what I don't. There's a lot of conditions now with the newest version that lets you give a lot of control to that. So now that I did a huge dump on logging and Sysmon, I'll stop talking and I'll just pass the ball to you guys.
I think the podcast is over. No, so first of all, Sysmon is what got me on my journey for being a threat hunter. So to see this, and that was with JP Cert back in the day. All they did was they executed living off land binaries and just wanted to see, hey, what does this logging look like? And they just used different logging. I think they had PowerShell, they had Windows native logging, and then Sysmon. And me not knowing what that was, dove into it. And it's just powerful to see that this is still, like, it still works. It's still amazing. I think everyone figured out that, hey, someone created Sysmon for EDR logging for Microsoft. And then you see it in the EDRs, which is pretty much the same stuff. So they built that in. So you could just see the staying power of Sysmon. And I like that chart that you showed, because there was actually, I had a conversation with someone that was saying, hey, we have a SIM and we have an EDR in our environment. Why should I put Sysmon in there if the EDR is going to pick it up? I was like, well, my main answer is, one, if you have a SIM, you can configure what you're going to pull in. If you have an EDR, that's kind of a black box, right? You can't really tell it to get extra stuff, extra logs. Unless it's like a feature request and they can really do that, which I don't know the pain of that. Maybe it's possible, maybe not. But either way, if you have a SIM, you can definitely take your EDR logs, see what's going on here, say, all right, well, I'm going to do the same stuff on Sysmon in my Windows environment, compare it and say, all right, we got, all these logs. Here's the overlap. We're going to keep the EDR here. We're going to keep logging that. We're going to filter that all in Sysmon and just keep driving forward. So, I mean, it's definitely worth it to have Sysmon in your environment. I mean, the power that you see here, all the tools that are being built off of it, honestly, just love it. It's great. Like I said, it got me on my journey here.
Swing it over to Tom. You have experience with Sysmon?
Oh yeah, for good and bad. Sysmon's great. I don't know any security practitioner that wouldn't speak, to a level of positivity about Sysmon. I guess something to try to add to the conversation that hasn't already been said, so I'm not in an echo chamber. The audience, practitioners, anybody trying to get into Sysmon, my advice through experience: start small. Make sure you use a templated configuration. Going in there dry is going to lead you into a lot of problems. We've come across that. But the other thing too is, if you're looking at it, and anybody's listening, and you're looking at using it and really trying to scale it for enterprise, really kind of think about that piece, because it will take some care and feeding over time. Like, Sysmon is great, and it's stood the test of time so far, and it's still surprises by finding new ways to allow you to build detections and identify badness, right? But yeah, I mean, Sysmon's amazing. Just if you're deploying in an enterprise, start with a known, tried and true. Polish, you shared a lot of great options. Actually, I really like that EDR telemetry. I've never seen that before. That's interesting. I'm looking forward to giving that an additional look. But yeah, Sysmon's awesome.
Yeah, I think we were laughing because we spoke about some of the issues with Sysmon in the past. Lee, Anarchy, Arcanal over here causing issues with Sysmon.
APT Lee.
Kingpin. Yeah, I might or might not have been there.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, not biggest negatives, but one of the things that's hard to do with Sysmon is, again, that management of it. And I think that's why you pull up that Sysmon Tools repo, right? Like, I know people could probably distribute it via GPO policies, SCCP if you're a full Windows shop, manage configs that way, but it's still, there's not like a native, really easy way to do it and turn on logging for each one of the things that you want. Like, staring at the XML can be daunting for people who don't look at XML. And so being able to manipulate and add things in as you go over time could be daunting. But to Tom's point, start small, and then build upon what you need for a visibility perspective, right? And I think Lee mentioned it. Out of all the EDR tools that I've used in the past, I think Elastic might be the only one that you can define in the YAML to go after other like event logging. Which is interesting, right? So yeah, to turn on visibility if you don't already have it is very hard to do. And so you really need to understand how to supplement that. And that Excel sheet that you brought up again, Tom, you said it, like, that's impressive, right? That takes a lot of time to build. I'm curious how that person's going to maintain this over time. But go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say there's a gotcha in that sheet is, just because you have some visibility to a telemetry, like I always use registry keys as an example. Obviously, a lot of tools will look at registry keys, but they're not equivalent as far as what registry keys they monitor. There's overlapping there, but that's why a lot of adversaries use a lot of different keys, especially depending on what environment they're after, because they already know which ones aren't being watched by what tools.
Yep.
That's what's cool about Sysmon, is that's where you can easily double down on things that or you can test and know that aren't in your being detected or monitoring your environment. So
yeah, and I love it. I always bring this up with the open source side. The bad actors are probably looking at the same repos as we are.
Well, they use open source attack tools now, right? Like, I mean, it'd be funny.
Exactly.
It's really like open source versus open source in some avenues. And it's like, if you actually did a bake off between the open source attack versus the open source defense tools, I don't know who would win. They're both sides are so really good, So.
But what you can adjust quicker is the open source defending tools.
That's true.
Right?
That's what ends up happening is people they fork it and make it really amazing, and then that's when you're screwed.
Right. Or turn things off and on as you need, depending on the attack, right? It'd be hard to call up a major EDR vendor and be like, hey, I need to see this visibility because I'm getting attacked right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have a question for actually all three of you, because I think all three of you have been in a position that I haven't been. And I would say that's dealing with SIMs, management, administration, dealing with the amount of logs that are coming in. So for someone who wants to send this out, and someone says, hey, I have Sysmon, I want to deploy to my environment. I have 2,000 endpoints. a certain sim that costs a lot of money, and every
Right.
time I bump up, or every time I get ingest more logs, I bump up a license. How can you help?
I'll let Tom go first.
Sure. I think I'm going to take a stab. If I get off rails, just course correct me. From some of my experience, I think a couple ways is, again, like, you're going to manage that load, whether you have 2,000 endpoints, 100 endpoints, 10,000 endpoints. It starts and ends at the config that you deploy for Sysmon. So Mike, you nailed it head on. That XML file can be very tedious to get after, but if you're going to deploy Sysmon enterprise-wide, you better have some folks familiar with that configuration, because you are going to need to adjust it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, really. But I think past that, like if you're looking to send into a SIM, so say you can add control layers. There's something, I have experience with in the past of leveraging Windows Event Forwarding as kind of a mid-hop that lets you do additional filtering. You can kind of like collect the things, but you send the things you want to send to SIM, right? Instead of just opening the pipe from the endpoint of the Sysmon log and pulling it in. If your SIM doesn't allow you to control that with some kind of an agent, that can help. I wouldn't recommend large scale with that. Never seen the scale well, but ideas like that. So if you can, pre-processing into your SIM, do some kind of filtering, some kind of layering, and just pull in what you need. Really look at, again, if you're bringing in a SIM, you're bringing in it for a reason. So stay true and tried and true to your use cases and what you're trying to develop with it, and start there and just build up. Don't just open the pipelines, build up, and you can manage that pretty well, I think, if you consider all those things.
Yep. Scott, you got any?
Yeah, so one of the things I know is I always try to, especially when I'm developing use cases for threat hunting, and there's specific logging that I need, and it's not natively present because it's either not turned on in Windows or there's not a Sysmon config for it. I go down the path both times to figure out how to do both, because depending on who our customers are, they may or may not be using Sysmon, and if it's capable in Windows, we want to try to show like how you can do that. And it seems very consistent when you talk about that log volume perspective. I can write a better Sysmon config to produce exactly what I'm looking for, versus when I turn on the logging in Windows and an audit policy, I get a lot more noise, because it's more like a light switch versus something that I can like a dimmer switch, right? I feel like with Sysmon, you almost have that dimmer switch where you can find a better medium where you can exclude some things and what you want to collect around a specific event. Versus with Windows, it's like, I want to see these types of events with this type of thing in it. And you're like, okay, that's cool, except for the system uses that thing repeatedly, and I'm only looking for these edge cases. So I feel like with Sysmon, if you're smart and you get kind of mature with it, you can actually cut some of your logging down. Now, the disadvantage with Sysmon is when you configure it for specific things, you might only have specific visibility. So you got to figure out how to kind of do both. How can I collect everything I care about, and then niche things as well? And as you get better with your config and mature, you can do that. And some of those examples I provided from those sites help build some of that. That's where I sit. When it comes to Windows logging, for instance, auth logs, PowerShell. I would almost do everything else Sysmon related. I'm sure there's going to be some edge cases I'm not thinking about, like, probably application logs and things like that. But between typical security logs, auth and PowerShell, I'd put to Windows, and I just use Sysmon for everything else. It's my preference.
And yeah, I think, all points, again, not to repeat anybody, but I guess we have to assume that there's already logging going into that SIM. There's already some sort of logging and visibility there. So again, it's just working backwards from your, maybe your gaps, right? I think starting out, I know kind of the attack surface management side, that is kind of a buzzword. People are talking about that a lot right now. It's very important to understand and really start left of threat intelligence of, what actual visibility, what gaps, what risk, who's going to attack us. That all goes into kind of the maturity of the organization. And so as you start to turn on these things, again, tying it back to the techniques and tactics that are most relevant to you is a great way to start, to understand that visibility as you start to tick up that logging. But I mean, once you turn on a SIM, you almost end up chasing your tail with alerts and all the other things that come along with it. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle, right? The snake eating its tail, with trying to configure and manage. I don't think there's an organization out there that has a perfect SIM or SOC environment. If there is one, please let me know, because I have not talked to them yet.
If there is one, they're lying to you. Straight face lying to you.
There's a big hole that nobody's talking about, right?
All right, cool. Have we beat up my voluminous Sysmon discussion, you think? We're good to roll on?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so the next lead, we're gonna jump to yours. I'll pull up the site if you want to introduce it.
Absolutely. So pause real quick. We're not going to stop on Sysmon. JC789, while we're on the topic, asks, for all the value of Sysmon, what about the rule to be careful about Trojan utilities during forensics? Could Sysmon be Trojaned to ignore the attacker artifacts? Could any dependencies for items that Sysmon depends on be Trojaned and then the output is useless? Or worse than useless, since it could be misleading to the analyst as far as false negatives. So basically, what happens if there's supply chain attack on Sysmon? Am I understand that right, JC?
Is it that, or if an attacker's in an environment and they manipulate the logging in a way
So
that...
I have attacked Sysmon to basically disable Sysmon, but you don't know it's disabled, right? Where it just loses visibility. So an attacker's, I've read a lot of things from a lot of different places that like they're really pro Sysmon, but Sysmon becomes a target in some avenues because it can be very powerful depending on who's managing it, right? So there are some specific failure type things when it comes to Sysmon, but there are some attacks where you can kind of do things with the driver to kind of disable the driver component, but the Sysmon service is still running. That's kind of what I'm alluding to with the attack against Sysmon. Well, I mean, I think I built a hunt package around that, but the idea is, yeah, you've got to look at how do you defend your components that you use for security. And that's where it does help to look for if Sysmon, for instance, is being attacked and you're not getting logs. I mean, if you have good visibility for when things stop logging, you should see a huge deficit in logs when it comes to certain devices or devices on the network in general, whatever. That could be a telling thing, right?
Or the actor has access to one of Lee's Sysmon scripts and they drop it on and it just starts logging like crazy.
Like too much logging.
I should have
really good. Like you bring up a very, very good point. Can you imagine like what that could do to a security operation where all of a sudden the config just gets replaced by include everything, right?
I mean, you
flip the include to excludes.
Right. So that's something else. Like I believe there's something when the config gets updated that gets logged, and if not, there at least is done usually through the command line. So you could probably create some detections based on the command line running the Sysmon executable to determine when people are trying to leverage that, but it usually requires administrative privileges. So not saying that really stops anybody, but at least if you put the files and things in protected areas, it should limit or cause an attacker to create more noise to get there. But yeah, you should always be, I mean, the same thing can happen. Like, what was it? The guy who developed Mimikatz, he was people were boasting about how, look, we can stop Mimikatz, blah, 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 blah. And he got really upset. So he figured out how to use everyone that boasted about how they can stop Mimikatz and use their EDR tool to then deploy Mimikatz. Like, I mean, it happens, right? Like, I mean, it's basically saying like, yes, it's a cat and mouse kind of game and you just got to be smart about it.
One of the biggest cybersecurity flexes ever.
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved it. So.
Okay, but yes. So, thank you for answering that question. So also, the Mandiant report today or yesterday or the other day, the M-Trends 2023 came out. I know I think we beat up the IBM report, and this is basically the same thing from Mandiant's point of view. Mandiant's data, and their insight. So I'm not going to read all 108 pages to you. Foley tried earlier today. I think he didn't make it.
You got halfway through.
You gotta match Scott's energy, right? You gotta just dump it.
I'll see who's dedicated.
You, Lee, also should be voluminous.
But so, you know, when I posted on LinkedIn, it even said like estimated read 128 minutes. I was like, holy crap. So, you know, going through, and normally for Mandiant reports or big CrowdStrike or, sorry, J-Dubs, if they're quick and we saw this attack, what happens? How I approach it is I go in there, I look for the artifacts that were interesting, find the relationships between processes, files name, and so on, things that I can use, and basically operationalize data or the Intel report so that I can use it in our environment to create a hunt package. So and when I say, you know, relationships, I'm not looking for, I'm looking for like, what is this process kicking off? You know, this is the child process, this is the parent process. Does that make sense? Are these executing from the correct directories? You know, thinking like something of how can I use this and see what happened here in search of my environment. These reports, on the other hand, give us the big picture, which I think is great because because it takes everything that we're doing and it shows us overall. So it's like, you know, why are we focusing on these? You know, customers ask, people ask, you know, what should we be looking for? And we say, well, look for these top 10 MITRE attack techniques. Why? Well, we've seen them a lot in the threat intel reports that we've operationalized. Most of the hunt packages that we've created are probably those MITRE attack techniques. And we say, okay, you know, that's why we think you should start here. But this report tells us, hey, this was real life, these were real life attacks that we saw. And, you know, this is the data that we got from it. And it's like, wow, okay, how can we compare what we're doing to the real life and then say, okay, we need to make some adjustments. We need to change our focus a little bit. Or if we're right there or close to it, we can keep going. So the one thing that really caught my mind, and I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights. I'm going to try and copy and paste these in there if possible. Nope. Is the dwell time was actually reduced this year.
On some regions.
What?
If you look at the different regions, one region actually increased, but most of them were.
I'm talking about the global
Okay.
time. And, thank you, Cyborg. But so my, you know, last year I read it and I'm pretty sure it said it was down because of ransomware. And you're like, well, yeah, they get in there, they go quick, they get to the end of the job, and that's it, right? That's all they want to do. And you think, and I was like, man, like they're getting better at ransomware. And actually, that was not the case this year. The fact is that they mentioned that from external sources, it reduced again, but it was 19 days. And then from internal notifications, it was 13 days. And they really talked about the power of partnerships between organizations working together that say, hey, you know, we're security researchers. We're seeing a bunch of stuff over here. You know, what's going on? Is that your company? And that kind of speaks about the growing community where it's not like we're siloed anymore, where it's like, oh, they got compromised. All right, we're just going to ignore it, or we're going to take advantage of this and say we'll never get compromised and so on. But it's nice to see that it wasn't, I should say again, the global median dwell time wasn't down because of ransomware. Now ransomware is still happening, but the fact that notifications are going up is really good. I'm sure, you know, a lot of it has to do with what's going on in Europe and Russia, where researchers and organizations are having a closer eye, but there is some good coming out of that.
So does it mention anything about increased capabilities outside of the human element and the sharing and communication? Does it talk about tooling? Does it talk about visibility? Does it talk about like?
So it talks about, it mentioned detection by source, I noticed, and I was going to touch on this, where it basically highlighted where were detections happening, external or internal. And I thought that was an interesting breakup. And then what was surprising to me was like 2011, it was 94% of detections that they were seeing were externally being identified. And now it's kind of fallen in 2022. Now it's like 63% are still externally identified, but I still think it's a high number. But I think they went to, when you looked at non-ransomware, internal actually was winning, right? And maybe because ransomware is so public, it's very easy for people to just like externally, they would identify those types of things. But that really threw me to looking how close external and internal were, because, you know, I like to think that when you run a security team, like you're finding most of the big things that happen, not somebody else. And I was kind of surprised by that, but I don't know if that speaks to tools, but yeah.
What would be identified as that external?
Like, I think external reporting, like they get notified either by a security firm, by government, or like public shame, you know, like I like to call it, where someone says, hey, I popped you and this is proof, you know, that kind of thing.
Could you lump that external into those MSPs that we talked about earlier? Like, would that be an external group outside of your organization?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Falcon Watch be outside your organization, right? I'm just trying to figure out what the delineation.
Well, like Mandiant, maybe, like, you know, I don't know. I can't remember what exact services they provide, but obviously if they were identifying it before a customer reached out to them, if they had that visibility, I would assume they would account that as external, but I don't know.
I would, yeah, they do have that service, and so it's probably tied to their capabilities, right? You're not going to put out this massive report and not have it kind of nudge you in the direction.
Oh yeah, if you use us, we'll find those for you. Yeah.
Well, so they said the increase in external notification observed in 2022 is likely impacted by Mandiant's investigative support of cyber threat activity, which targeted Ukraine, and an increase in proactive notification efforts.
Yep.
So
there we go. Yeah.
Which I completely skipped that note, but external notifications was up to 63% from 47% in 2022.
So
once again,
I was going to note on that, you know, you bring up that point we talked about sharing, right? And people sharing to be better at responding, and that might help. I mean, and we talked about MSSPs earlier, you know, that's the advantage with the same adversary being aggressive in real time to multiple entities, right? What you learn from what they do here, detect them here, you can detect them there and there. So it gets easier and easier for someone who has visibility across multiple verticals or organizations for some aspects because of that. So I feel like that kind of, based on the climate of today, it probably empowers a lot of those, like, you know, MSSPs / Mandiant type services, right? Just thought.
Yeah, so going back to Mike, your point too, at the very last sentence of detection by source, you asked about the human element. They actually said this number increased a lot because they had more people attending the threat hunting workshops that we have.
Oh yeah, that's a really valid point. That's cool.
That's great.
It's not actually there.
That's awesome.
I like to think so. No. But so moving on, so industry trends, and this was another call out to what's going on in Ukraine, is that government was the highest across the board. And if you think about why that would be, you know, Ukraine, exactly, right? You got two big, strong cyber governments going at each other. It's really dwarfed everything else. I mean, think about all that we've learned. I know I posted a while ago a article that they read, or they collected all the wipers that have been seen in the conflict so far, and it was a big report. It was just like, man, you know, so they're attacking, you know, they're trying to undermine each other, you know, Russia's trying to tear down Ukraine's government bit by bit, so that it's just easier for the taking. Also, this one was interesting to me, and it really made me, it was really surprised, but data theft is up from 29% to 40%.
I feel like ransomware drives that though, right? Because they're doing a lot of extortions.
So you would think, right? And let me see real quick, what might I say? So they think they were actually, they believe that the goal was changing from extortion to just intellectual property theft.
I mean, yeah.
So it said in 19% of these intrusions, the data stolen was used by the threat actor during negotiations for payment. So I mean, it's there, but it's not like I mean, it's almost half.
Well,
Oh, no,
take it.
sorry.
Well, think about this. Like China's economy, right, was kind of suffering for recent COVID restrictions they have and whatever. And a big part of their market, not trying to like shame China, but is intellectual property theft. That's like a big part of their cyber market for why they break into places and steal things, because they can produce them at cheaper cost and compete with other industries globally. So maybe that plays into that. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
Like, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, wasn't there a major shift in, at least in the United States, the reporting timelines that organizations have to do if they are breached? So I think
I hate
either
those things.
CISA or was it CISA? I think they increased the time that you had to disclose a potential breach within, I think it was like a week, right? So
Yeah, they always try to shorten it, but they don't never do a good job defining what that means, which is the
Right.
most frustrating part.
Right.
But yeah,
I was kind of tying to the fact that these numbers are starting to creep up. We're starting to see the proliferation of ransomware and
Oh,
data
yeah.
integration with tied to they're just talking about it more, right? I'm sure those numbers were kind of not as drastic, but maybe something else happened on the reporting side that got them that information. Oh, the graphs are amazing on this, by the way.
Oh, it is amazing.
That's
Whoever
like,
did the graph-
honestly, if you're gonna read these reports, the first thing I always do is like scroll through and look at graphics. And if the graphics can tell me at least something, then I'm like, okay, this might be worth reading. If I read graphics and I have no idea what I'm looking at, I'm like, this is gonna take a lot of work, and I don't have time to read 100 and some pages.
Linear scatter plots, all right, with regression models built in. It's like,
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. For the sake of time, any high topics you guys want to touch on in the specific report? Because there's a lot here, and I do think like if you've got the time, I got halfway through it in like an hour.
I got two
go
more
ahead.
points.
Yeah,
And
you go for
then I'm done. I found this interesting. In 27% of attacks, they found multiple threat actors in the environment, which tells me that either threat actors are trying, or like a 0-day comes out and then everyone goes attacks it, right? So everyone's like, hey, we compromised this. And then now it's just like a race to the keys of the kingdom. Or in my mind, maybe the initial initial access broker gets access to it and then says, I'm going to sell this to as many people as I
Sells
want.
everybody.
Right? Because they don't care, right? They're not getting.
I do.
Seems to be.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I was going to say it seems to be the case. I mean, we're sitting over here, we can't know for sure, but the bad guys are working together a lot more than the good guys are. So I bet it's a lot of that, a lot of overlap, a lot of selling their access, the tooling, et cetera.
So the one thing I noticed in the report, and this is like a pet peeve of mine, I wanted to mention this, I guess, so I'm glad you kind of paused here, is they mention the like 3,500 plus threat actors or threats. And I hate that because they're like unique behaviors they've seen in incidents. So it's like a behavior profile. And this is where a lot of, I think, of industries, they need to brand a threat actor and then talk about how they know about them. And this is what I really like about Dragos, is they do a really good job of saying, hey, we named this threat actor. We think they're associated with maybe said country and make some attribution, but they really focus on the profile behavior. And if that profile behavior changes, they just give it a new name because they want to make sure to stay consistent and not bring all that old behavior into the new behavior aspect or visibility, because that's really what it's about. Like, it's like, for instance, you're not going to be doing XP attacks on Windows 2010. So why would we keep those threat actor profiles around for the behaviors? I mean, granted, I know a lot of techniques still are applicable, but like still like that mindset, right? 3,500 plus threats. That just speaks to me there's some unique profiling that needs to be done, and we don't need to be holding on to how we attribute things as strongly, right? But that was a pet peeve of mine. But it's interesting to see there's that many unique things in people's environments, so it shows that they're very crafty as far as changing based on their infrastructure.
And the last one I will mention is that there has been very little shakeup with the top 10 most frequently seen techniques. If you look at the first picture in Discord, that's from this year's report. If you look at the one in red, that's from last year's report. Now, I believe the top two just flipped, so they're still the same. But for the most cases, they're all the same, or they're very close to the same. So once again, if you're looking for a starting point of saying, what am I looking for? Where should I start?
Yeah,
Here you go.
that's very
I mean,
valuable
we have 2
information.
years in a row, right?
I need to caveat that with, don't just go out there and run an emulation against command and stripping interpreter and be like, all right, I'm cool, didn't find anything, I'm done. Right? Like,
Yeah.
tie that to the actor or the threat or the risk that you care about.
Or
Is just covering down on that TTP in that one instance. If you go look at MITRE, they do have some emulations. Invoke Atomic Test has some emulations. Veridin might. Those other tools might. Scythe is another one, but it's not tied to a thing that you should probably care about from an environment.
so how I like to use this data is not like, let me go find how to emulate these techniques. It's when I read threat reports, what techniques do I focus on the most, right? Because I'm like, hey, these are really popular. Threat reports come in. That means, do I see these there, and how are they? What techniques are they using to do this MITRE technique, right? Like, how are they proceduralizing that? Because then I can start figuring out, well, what's common and what's not. So how can I write a hunt or detection that crosses over across all these threats that are using this type of technique? Do my techniques, the way I have them detected or hunted for today, for these specific, like T1059 command and scripting interpreter, it's a pretty broad category. How do I have that covered based on focusing just on that across threat reports, right? Like you said, like that just highlights that I should expect to see that with almost 50% of the adversaries.
Right.
So that when I look at reports, that's what I should be focusing on from a prioritization standpoint with threat intel. It's
Yeah.
a piece.
And if it's okay if I add really quick, to
Yeah.
Mike's point of don't look at just one and say, hey, look, I scanned it, I'm done. These intel reports, a lot of the stuff that comes out, there's a lot of solid ones that really kind of, and the tools, Mike, that you mentioned were great, like especially leveraging MITRE and kind of seeing some of those emulation models. Every place has visibility gaps. So if you kind of just hit them one to one, and you don't really start patterning that behavior and looking at how they chain together, where in the kill chain they're hitting, where you in your environment can actually see these things happening, you're gonna set yourself up for failure. So you don't want to kind of just look at them one for one. You really want to look at that, put it into its own story and look at the, navigating that story as a whole. I had to add on to that, Mike, because it was a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't think that if you can detect command and scripting interpreter, that's half of the attack.
Right. So
Cool.
yeah, I think that 30 left, right? So you want to switch over to the.
Well,
It's in-
Tom, you want to hit your topic, and then we'll do you.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think at least what I was intending to do with this, I think it'll catapult pretty well into the next part. So the nugget that I'm bringing to the conversation today was a report. It was today actually that I was made aware of by a couple of my senior analysts in-house that I have been burning on all day, and I'll explain why in a second. But it's a report from Mandiant about the 3CX software supply chain attack with some attribution and kind of talking about how it was a daisy chained supply chain attack, basically. The report is solid. I won't go down and break it down word for word, because the reason I wanted to talk about this, I want to kind of jump to that pretty quickly. But there are some really solid nuggets in this report, especially if there's anybody listening, anybody that does listen, are aspiring content developers. I think this report is really solid for giving you a lot of nuggets to go out and try to find some of those kind of daisy chained attacks that I just mentioned. There's a section down at the bottom that kind of touches on all the MITRE attack. All the MITRE attack techniques that are seen within the attacks. You have a lot of IOCs inside of there. You can really hit the ground running looking for some of the stuff. So it's a really solid report to leverage to build detections or consider building detections or some sort of content from. But the reason that I kind of wanted to talk about it, especially when I'm sitting at the table with some security professionals, and there's people active in the chat, which is great. This is something that I think we're all aware of. Supply chain attack is very much a thing that's being leveraged, and it seems like the ones that are being popped are getting bigger and bigger or more widespread. And it's a scary vector when you're looking at protecting your own enterprise, because most people deal with many vendors, right? So this has been kind of spinning in my brain all day, and I really want to pitch it as a topic to get your guys' opinions, and anyone in the chat, of course. What would be some, just some high level surface ideas for how you could detect or pivot a detection or pivot a hunt, to looking at, okay, we were hit by this vendor, but if we get intel like this that says another vendor was daisy chain, now you have to go back and find that vendor. I can't help but think that there might be some analytics or some methodologies that could be put in place to be a little more proactive in your own environment with tracking vendors and understanding what might be there, instead of just having to be like most of us are, sitting and waiting for that report to come out that says this vendor got hosed really bad and they are widespread actively used in our environment, and now the whole house is on fire. So I hope that makes sense, guys. I'm happy to expand, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna silence and see what you guys think.
I'll jump in. So, one of the things I always harp on and I bring up constantly is the idea of profiling. And so obviously, we put out like 4 hunt packs around this specific vulnerability, and one associates with the loading of the no malicious DLL. One's about the way that the desktop application executes. One about how it calls itself an execution, which is very suspicious for some supply chain based things, because it's like, using itself, which is not normal for a lot of applications. And then the last one I talk about profiling, it's about looking at the DNS request to non-3CX domains. And when I think about threat hunting in general, like, you're looking for behaviors, right? For know how actors behave. But I feel like in that built-in time, when you're spending that time doing proactive hunts, some things you should incorporate are like, let's look at the type of software we use in our environment, and how would we categorize risk from a supply chain perspective? Which will be the riskiest types of software we actually own? And why not profile, hey, how does this software communicate as far as external resources? How does this software execute as far as what's the execution chain typically look like? Because you can build really good detections for that, or at least have something where something does come up like this comes out, you're like, oh, stuff just went crazy, we got to know what's going on. Now I have a cheat sheet, at least some sort of documentation to reference, like, well, this is what I should see, what do I see differently, how can I build that on the fly, whatever. That's why I'm like a huge advocate for understanding your environment, and that's why I just like to, if I have nothing better to do, I'll just profile how things work. Like, hey, let's look at all the different flags on the logs to see what logs are slightly different and why. It's just like on whatever topic you want to touch on. But I think from your supply chain perspective, if you have a software that you're dependent on as a business that's installed everywhere in your environment, why not just spend an hour or two to understand how does that thing operate? How does it communicate? Just so you know your left and right limits as far as, if I have to investigate this specific thing, where would I start?
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. It's really, really scary, right, when these type of things happen. The Log4Shell is another great example that I think a lot of people kind of puckered a little bit, right? Like, it was a scary situation. That one's different, right? So we talk about 3CX. It's a piece of software that you're selling across your org. That is the thing. Log4Shell, which is really scary about that, is that it was Apache, and it was nested in a lot of other security, software, right? And so then you had to understand the dependencies of all your software and where that fit in, based on that kind of vulnerability that was passed through, right? I would posit that if you have a Windows application and there are requirements for a developer to submit something to the Play Store and the Apple Store, I feel like it would be very easy for that developer of that application for that software, call it Windows, to include not only what firewall ports need to be open for it to run, but the execution chain, right? I feel like they should know it. It'd be really interesting if you created a kind of a standard in order for you to get a piece of software signed by Microsoft or deliver that. There needs to be some level of accountability on the software vendor side to include some of that documentation information potentially. right? They're starting to do that on the DevOps side with packages that are being deployed as they go through the CI/CD pipeline. You're validating the package, you're validating what that package is doing, and you're able to scan those things as it goes through that pipeline, and you might publish something into AWS, but it's a lot harder to do from a software perspective, right? So it's a hard problem to solve. I don't know if you can proactively assume that this software is bad and go hunt for it. But to Scott's point, if there's some way you can profile and understand what that software is doing, because you typically probably already have an approved software list. So go take a look at each one of those tools. Maybe you'll have an approved software list.
We don't ask your security guys. We can give you access to all the names of the tools that are running in your environment.
Yeah, Tom, you got any
Yeah.
follow-up?
No, that's great. And I I've seen, through firsthand, you have, I bet a lot of companies, probably not most, probably less than should be aspired to, have that approved software kind of list and all of that. And what I've seen working in a SOC and talking to other SOCs and understanding kind of how people look at that is like some analysts that you tend to you have a curtain, but it's not all the way covering the window. So you have this approved software list, and people are like, oh, it's approved, and they're not really looking at the behavior of things, or maybe that behavior is maybe a twist new, or maybe they go blind to it because it is in an approved software.
Yeah, I think that's a big part, right?
Right. So now, that's got my mind spinning on, I'm sure, because generally the things I'm thinking about are generally not doable, but the idea of, looking at maybe some of your critical software, some of your most important software that comes from a third-party vendor, and baselining its activity all the way down to the nitty-gritty, like finding out what its baseline is. So if it curves from that at all, you just have some kind of suspicion, or at least a thing of note that you can circle back to later.
I would say what you should prioritize on, because an adversary typically, unless it's like a ridiculously focused type of targeting, it's going to go after what they expect to be running across your entire environment. Like, for instance, if you work at a bank and use specific banking software to your bank that's very critical to high critical assets, that's not going to be like, maybe they want to be able to exploit it, but from a supply chain perspective, they want to be able to get their footprint everywhere the easiest possible way. So when you think about what software you want to look at and validate and profile or whatever, look at what makes your business run amongst like how people work and how people communicate. Because if you look at almost like all supply chain attacks thus far, that focuses on it, like how does IT effectively work? How do people effectively communicate? Because those are the tools that adversaries can take the most advantage of to have kind of the biggest impact as far as capability and access. So, that's how I would look at from that prioritization standpoint.
Yeah, Lee, you had something? So you raised your hand.
So I typed in the chat so I didn't forget it, because we know how I work. Check the directory it's coming from. Whether it's legit, whether it's open source, whether it's whitelisted, blacklisted, whatever the case may be. Is it living off the land binary? Where is it triggering from?
Or is it installed program in your programs directory versus your downloads directory?
I put all my stuff in your folder so that I know that's.
I noticed.
Smart play.
But like so if you install a program, right? And I believe I learned this from one of our partners or our customers, that SysWow or System 32 is 64-bit, SysWow is 32-bit on a 64-bit program. Mm-hmm. Program files x86 is 64-bit.
32.
I was about to say I might. But program files is 64-bit. So if you have anything that's running from, if you're in a 64-bit system and you see SysWow 64, red flag. You see programs files 32, that might be a red flag. But if you see something like, let's see if this works. I pulled this from the DFIR report. AnyDesk running from the user's videos folder. Even if AnyDesk does exist, does that make sense? Like, check with your admins, check with the people that allow this. Is this where we threw it?
So to highlight kind of what you're talking about to the folks that are listening, way back in the day when there was more compatibility requirements for 32 and 64-bit, most exploit code was written 32-bit exploit code for payloads. But the unique thing about that is that means if you exploited a 64-bit program and it was going to call any kind of system-based code, it would call from the syswow64. Great example of this, look at how Cobalt Strike worked, right? A lot of their payloads for exploiting were 32-bit written, and then all of a sudden you have a 64-bit program that would branch into 32-bit code, and it was a telltale sign something was exploited. So I don't think it's going to be as common today because more people are starting to develop 64-bit kind of exploit and payloads. But still something to take note of when you see that behavior as far as what Lee was referencing. It's it was a very powerful tell, at least a few years ago. I just don't know how long it'll stay true. Obviously, as long as 32-bit exists, you'll see it, but it's kind of a shame we're modernizing everything in a weird way to say that, but yeah.
About 50 years though, right? I mean,
yeah.
I know
we got time. We
just lost Windows 7 support, but that will be used until Windows 38's out.
Yeah, Windows 7's a new XP.
Yeah, most airports are probably still running XP.
Yeah.
So we want to move over to the next section. I know we're running out of time, yeah.
So Tom, we're gonna put you on the hot seat for this section.
That can only go well.
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
We're gonna all ask our questions at the same time. You have to answer correctly.
How fast can you answer questions? No, so really what we want to dig into, because I mean, some of us know you personally and we know you have I think a good story, but we really want to know, how did you get started as far as like cybersecurity? Like, what barriers did you run into? How did you overcome them? Where did you start? How did you finish? That kind of thing for the first question. And there's a couple more questions too I want to hit on, but let's just start with that.
Sure. I got into this game way late. Like, I'm not a career IT folk. I was doing a bunch of jobs, coming up. I came from a really poor area, inner city kid, and not a lot of opportunities that were out there for me to even understand that this was a career path. I had a knack for technology. I liked computers as they were coming up, but I'm old enough to be in the very early age of computers where the green and black Oregon Trail is still fantastic, and I can't wait to get my hands on it again. But yeah, I pivoted into, I was doing construction work for a local municipality, doing road work, and just figured, this isn't right. I could do more. So I went back to school and then I figured IT, that's what I went after. Associates in networking, that's kind of like a commonality for a lot of people, right? And then as you're going through that, you start figuring out like, wait, cybersecurity is a thing. This is really cool. So, all that little fuzzy feeling I got from watching Hackers, or whichever era you are, you have a hacker movie that you liked if you're in cybersecurity. That's
like the original.
Swordfish.
Right.
No,
Swordfish. There you go.
Swordfish. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I could go get paid for this. Like, yeah, I want to do this. So, broke into it. My degree only got me into a network operations center, but I was lucky enough to, get to a place where I was able to interview for the department I'm in now. And I came in, level 1 security analyst. I'm like, all right, cool, I got the job. Showed up the first day, I'm sweating balls, just sweating, nervous, anxious. Like, they have no idea. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when I sit down. Sit down at the desk, and like, everybody fake it till you make it. So I'm in there. I'm like, yeah, I know security. And then they sit me down in front of a SIM. I'm like, I've never even heard of what a SIM is before. So this is cool. But very quickly, I started digging into it. I love researching. Honestly, from cybersecurity point, if you can learn, if you're willing to go out, you're passionate, you're interested, you could find a knack. There's a lot of areas in cybersecurity. It's not just one thing. It is a whole bunch of things, and you can specialize in a lot of them, one of them, or any mix. Me personally, the thing that stuck me and got me to where I am now is I really kind of got into digging in the logs. I loved figuring out how to find the little puzzle pieces to find the bad guy. I love figuring out how to identify what logs I can pull in to get a crumb for a technique. And this is well before I was hip to MITRE, and I kind of used that to propel me to really learn the game. So recommendations for people trying to get in, there really is no barrier. There is so many resources out there, whether it's traditional schooling, whether it's going and getting certs, whether it's a hybrid, workshop, boot camp type thing, or you just going and self-researching, find a thing that really interests you and dive into it. And that's going to propel everyone. I mean, that's what it did for me. And I believe that's the same for pretty much all of us.
So
That's awesome.
what when you talk about everything cyber, what are kind of like your long-term goals when it comes to cyber then?
Oh, that shifted. I'm in leadership now. I don't even know how to speak to that, man. I'm in leadership in a corporate America environment, man. It's no, I don't know. For me, the passion piece is what I want to hang on to as much as I can. So mine's pivoted from the cybersecurity space where I right now what I want to do is I want to find ways to show the kids like me that are out there growing up that didn't know this was an opportunity that there is. There's a lot of bright individuals in this world. I'm working with some local high schools trying to get my foot in the door to help propel them, and I'm coming across some of these high school kids that are brilliant. They're very smart, and a lot of these kids are inner city. Some of them might not have a chance to actually get to show their talent. But from that to building out a team to really kind of propelling this notion of thinking differently. My opinion, and it's not necessarily slamming anybody that's out there doing this. There are many ways to do this job, but I believe wholeheartedly that your people are your core and your key. The technology is only as good as the people that use it and the people that build it and the people that tune it. And empowering those folks to think outside of the box, to innovate, to not just look for the posting that's out there and just follow it step by step, as that's how you're going to defend your enterprise. Understanding how to do things differently, and then supporting them. And the other thing too, I'm sorry, I'm rambling now.
Yeah, go for it.
This is your time.
I mean, I'm anxious to get your opinions. When I get passionate, it's like, all right, we're running. All right, let's go. I'm ready. We'll talk for hours. The other thing too is, there is a real value in diverse thinking when it comes to this stuff. I think InfoSec has had a long time of, kind of centering around the same kind of folks, the same kind of thinkers, and it's created these barriers for entry. I've personally, and I only have a small little sample set of this, but this is my personal experience. You look at people and you kind of see that they have a drive, they have an interest, they want to do this, but they come from a different kind of background. Maybe they don't have the, 20 years of IT experience, and they have to learn it. And you can create a platform to teach them, and then you let their passion run. And you see these people that have diverse thinking, and they've come from different places. They're solving problems you didn't even know you had. And it's so cool. And I think that's, where you ask, what I want to accomplish. I want to open the doors for people into this field because it is so damn fun. There is so much to do, and there's so much opportunity. So as much as I can open the door for folks and help folks succeed, that's what I want to do. That's my goal.
That's great.
So when you talk about like what does success in cyber mean to you, would that be it, branded, or would you adjust that answer slightly?
For me, like you're talking about my personal career.
Well, like success, like I guess some people look at success like the impact they have in the community versus impact as far as career versus just like what and are capable of. Like I don't know how you would define that, but how if you wanted to define it, what would that be?
I have roaring ambitions for what I might be able to leverage my, my seat and my knowledge and my experience to help improve or help create opportunities for. But I'm going to be humble and say, I'll reference back to working, with the local schools. If I can find a way to help one of these kids understand that there's a dream that they didn't know they could have way earlier than I did, my career is a success, 100%.
That's awesome.
So I want to say, before we ask the next question, I do want to say, please, if you do anything, I don't care if you become successful or not.
Thanks, Lee.
Even at high school, okay?
Let me know when I get there, buddy, please.
It's really what speaks to me about that is like, you talked about the talent, you talked about the bright kids, you talked about, maybe the opportunities aren't there. And I know that sometimes the hardest part, like we all know how normal schools are structured, right? Sometimes the ones that are the most talented aren't fit for that normal structure of a high school. So they may be failing because the passion's not there, not because they're not smart, but because it's just this whole system that they don't fit into, and they're like, well, I'm not even going to succeed in this. If the world's like this, then I'm doomed to begin with. Just keep that drive. I really like that what you're doing, because that, like, thinking about all the kids like that could be here, and possibly making better decisions. That's awesome that you're doing that. So thank you. So keep doing that.
I appreciate that, Lee. Thank you.
I think I've seen, at least over the past, I've only been in cyber for about 10 years as well, right? So coming in, there was kind of the old guard, needing 20 years of IT network experience to even become an analyst, and we're hiring a junior. So that means you're like -2 to get this job, right? Like some impossible standards and requirements. And it almost takes these companies and these industries to take a risk with these kids that are putting up the effort to grow their careers and become the cybersecurity analyst or engineer that they want to be. One of the things that we always try to hire for is the individual that goes out and learns on their own, right? That has a home lab, is doing educational courses. The amount of resources for cybersecurity out there is unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
Free resources too, right? Like I learned Python via edx.org and these like college level courses that I could take on my own to learn a programming language, right? And it was free. It just took my time and effort to do it, right? And so there's examples out there. We have to get rid of these stringent requirements to say you need to be this expert to do this job that you don't really need to be an expert in, right? And so, I saw it personally last weekend. I was out at Walmart's conference, SparkCon. It was amazing. If you can go next year, go. It's a little nudge to Walmart, but I had never seen that kind of community engagement with other vendors in the space. We talked about sharing communication, other vendors, other organizations, outside groups. The state had their own security kind of like group. There was high school kids. Like, it was amazing. It was really heartwarming to see all these opportunities for people, especially in a state like Arkansas, right? But I want to see more of that, and I want these organizations to start taking risks on these kids because they will shine.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead. I want to ramble.
I was gonna say the best thing about that young talent, giving them an opportunity, is when you give them the opportunity, I feel like they're the ones that'll work the hardest because they got the most they feel like they need to prove, right? Just being that young gun ready to go, right?
Yeah.
And then they have that talent, right? That, just growing up in a different generation of technology and using things or whatever, being able to explore things or knowing how to research things differently than how we research things, right? Like, there's this like native ability to learn in some of these folks. And what's kind of cool is, there's two things, right? There's one where like person is going to flourish and maybe they might move on, but the thing is you're contributing to the community at that point. I mean, like, if you make a really good cyber professional, I don't know how many connections I've had that have moved on elsewhere that I still lean into for all sorts of problems, things, whatever, right? Like, when you build that network, it's not like you're losing an asset. You're just diversifying your communications in your community a little bit that you can now reach out to. Or two, they become so loyal because you gave them an opportunity, and that's the person that will stay with you the longest because they're like, hey, I would never have this opportunity. I love what I do, and you've created an environment that I want to work in and that I've grown in. So you kind of have like the best of both worlds, I think, when you're able to hire that hunger, young talent that you were able to, create that platform or give that opportunity, right? So, I really think that's a strong case.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. I mean, the fact that your goals in your career is just to give back and have opportunities for other people is amazing, right? It's not to go be the manager of managers and make, like, there's only so high you can go up in cyber, but that's awesome that it's really giving back to provide those other opportunities for people coming up underneath you.
I don't know, Mike. I don't know how the hell I got here. I don't even know how I fell into this. I didn't have aspirations into being a cybersecurity manager, executive, or anything like that. And it's not that I'm trying to downplay that, that's just a personal feeling and choice. But I'm here, so they decided to take a chance on me, so I'm gonna show them why it's of value to take a chance on other people for sure.
Absolutely. That's amazing.
Pass along.
So I thought it was funny. So Tom and I had talked previously and talking about like, would it be worth being at that C-level position? And like both him and I were kind of talking how, I don't want to speak too much for you, Tom, but we were kind of talking like
You're good.
like that's a place that would kind of be uncomfortable because we're so far removed from the people that we kind of care about when it comes to cyber, right? Because we know the people on the floor make the biggest difference, but also like since both Tom and I have that strong feeling of wanting to make a difference, unless I could be or he kind of agree with me, but he can speak to it too. If I was at a C-level position, I would have to be in a C-level position where I have the freedom to make whatever decisions I think make the best impact and still not be controlled by someone who's just above me or a board. So I'm still limited in playing the puppet master, but my head's like taking on most of the risk, right?
It doesn't exist, sadly.
Do they make
But there's
a-
always
Well,
somebody-
Right,
Can we be
right. And
ambitious?
that's why
Let us
I
be
don't- I can't
ambitious for a minute, Mike. Let us dream, Mike. Come on.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I
Position
know
that's
the
still
reality, and that's why I don't feel like I could ever be there, right? Because, like, I feel like if you put me in that position, I should be able to make those decisions that really make the sweeping impact. Like, hey, we're changing this because this makes sense. I don't think I feel that seat.
Well, I think we're talking about it from you being a security practitioner at an organization, and maybe on the product side is different. I would,
Like the business side.
offer up the fact that like this collective group here have been able to move very fast and do what we want without any kind of like barriers. But it's different when you're tied to an organization with budget and revenue and board and
Larger scale, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Tom, it's up to you then. You need
We
to
can
be the
dream.
first C-level that has access to a SIM and EDR still. And once you find that role, let us know.
All right.
No, I think just let me get access to my people. Let me just get that. I know I'm not going to be able to be technical. I've understood that, and it took 3 years for them to beat that out of me that I wasn't allowed to touch the tool anymore. I had to teach people how to do it. But yeah, as at the echoing Scott, man, they put you at that level. It would be a dream if you had that kind of freedom and that trust and that that runway to go ahead and be in that place. I can't help but dream what could be built with that type of mentality without that segmentation of leadership, with
Also-
being able to get down and work, talk with your people and inspire. That's the thing, right? Like if I had the runway to inspire people, man, what could you accomplish, right?
I think it's just I think there's organizations that have that freedom. I don't think it's in cyber yet. I think there's still a lot of gates and barriers with the board, the C-level, the managers.
Well, it's hard to communicate, right? Like cyber's still a foreign language to the rest of the business in some aspects.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to take time to kind of build into that. I'm sure it's out there in other organizations and business, verticals where everybody has the same methodology, mindset, and language, and so they can be on the same page. But cyber, to your point, Scott, once it gets past the CISO level, their job is to dumb it down and be able to show value to everybody else. It's hard to have that communication across the board.
Very true.
Well, guys, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but we're kind of closing in on time here. So I want to try to. I know. There's so many things. We might have Tom back again. Go ahead.
Let's have Tom back. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to.
Let's extend it.
I'd be happy to. We have to just make sure we put a little note in there that Polly can't have 30 minutes to go through a sysmon rundown again. That's all.
You will speak
I went
first.
through pretty quick. I think you guys had a lot to say after I went through, but whatever. We can go back and watch the recording. So really what's good is the one thing I want to call out is really we have one thing coming up planned that people should be aware of, the Hunting for Impact workshop. Lee, if you want to give like a quick what that is, go for it.
So if you've participated in our previous workshops, that's how it's going to be. Basically, we have an attack. We have a log source that we're going to use. We're going to use the Elastic SIM to search on the data, and I'm going to walk you through and demonstrate 2 hunts where we find an artifact, and then we use the data that we have to pivot through the investigation and how we can really draw relationships between the events to finally paint the picture and say, this is what we're seeing, and this is why it makes sense, and this is what happened. So it's a lot of fun. You get a badge. Unfortunately, you have to hear me talk for about 45 minutes, but that's it. You get the recording, you get the OVA, you get the log source, and you can always go back and see our old workshops and visit those as well.
So go ahead, Tom. Well, Mike, sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say, Tom, it's been a pleasure, man. It was great chatting with you. I don't know you as well as these other guys, but we'd love to have you back. This has been awesome.
Yeah, we were just starting to crack the nut of some really exciting conversations there. So, no, absolutely. I'd love to. You guys are great. Keep up the good work. Keep fighting the good fight. And yeah, I'd be happy to come back and chop it up with you guys anytime. Thank you for
When are we
having
going to
me.
be on your podcast?
Yeah, you know what? I have a whole box of like, a drawer full of like podcast things that I'm like, yeah, I'm going to spin up a podcast one day. And it's just like, well, you have a child and that time disappears. You become manager, that time disappears. So
Yep.
maybe
All the
one day.
community work you're doing.
What's that?
So
And all the community work you're doing too, man.
Yeah. Oh God, that would be awesome. That'd be great to expand on that for sure. But thanks, guys.
So I know everyone's getting mad in the Discord, some of you, about us having to shut down or at the planned time. I'm going to point out, I know this has been a great conversation and I would love for it to go on longer, but this is a great opportunity to continue this at another time. So I just want to thank everyone for joining. Once again, love talking shop with friends, colleagues. Discord chat was really good this time, like having friends on with Tom. If you like what you hear, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or just about anywhere else you can get your podcast from. Leave a good review. It really helps us get discovered by others. And then they can join in the conversation as well. So for those of you who don't know, that we also do a brief 30 to 45 minute episode every week. Just hits on 5 breaking news topics on kind of what we think from intelligence reports, technical write-ups and stuff from a threat hunting perspective. And it hits on every week at Wednesday. So with that, happy hunting, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for joining, and I really love the conversation. It's been fantastic.
Take care, everybody.
Happy hunting, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Out of the Woods podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. For more information or to connect with Cyborg Security, check us out online at www.cyborgsecurity.com and follow us on social media. We'll see you next time.